I'd like to introduce our next speaker with a couple of questions. One question is, what happens if you plant a healthy seed in nutrient-rich soil? The right thing happens, right? The growth happens, etc. But what if you take that same seed and put it in nutrient-poor soil? Even though it's a fantastic seed, it's not going to work because the conditions aren't right. So what happens if the environment isn't ready for change to happen? What are the conditions that we need to create for social impact? How can we work on that foundational level so that ideas can stick and grow and occur and spiral the way they need to? And as we explore social innovation, from startups to community organizers and global entrepreneurs, that whole concept of conditioning comes up again and again. We can be ready for change, but the conditions also need to be ready for change. And that whole conversation is sometimes missed, but not by our next speaker. Fagan Harris has dedicated his work to nurturing conditions for change, starting with Baltimore, a complex environment to say the least. On paper, Fagan runs Baltimore Core, an organization that enlists talented people in public service and social entrepreneurship. But look under the paper, and you'll find an approach to recruitment and retention that catalyzes renewal by mapping needs and assets across the city, identifying the most promising solutions, and then funneling new talent towards these solutions. Busy guy. Fagan's approach has caught the attention of Ashoka, Echoing Green, the Aspen Institute, Forbes, Chronicle of Philanthropy, and pretty much anyone looking for social entrepreneurs in the United States. Welcome to the Elevating Impact Summit, Fagan Harris.
Hey everybody, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. And I want to congratulate the entire Summit team, Abby Croman, and everyone at Portland State. Can you join me in giving a big round of applause? I have felt so welcome here, and just tremendous kudos on an extraordinary conference. So we've got about 20 minutes, and anyone who knows me well knows that I'm a talker, so I better get going. I'm going to dive into 3 patterns that have really shaped our work in Baltimore, things that we've learned. Big caveat to start, we're not perfect. We have not figured this out exhaustively. We continue to learn and continue to iterate. And so while some of these insights may be challenging or at times I think difficult to metabolize as we think about next steps in our work, we're sharing in the spirit of continual learning and continual growth. So thank you for having me, and let's jump in. I went back to Baltimore 7 years ago as a young community organizer, and I had a job with the NAACP organizing around marriage equality. And we won that fight, and having come back home to the city that I grew up in, I started thinking about how can I be useful and what's the next step, and started meeting and talking with various social entrepreneurs and community leaders across the city, and discovered some really important insights. One, I met a gentleman named Chris Wilson, and Chris had returned home from prison after serving a natural life sentence. They let him out after about 20 years. And he comes home and he's homeless, and he's got $50 in his pocket. And Chris decides that he wants to start a construction company, hiring other returning citizens in Baltimore. And it was really powerful because Chris found out that thousands of returning citizens come home in conditions just like him, and they just want to work. And by virtue of their status and by virtue of the stigma that society's thrust upon them, they were denied those opportunities to work. And so I meet Chris Wilson, and then I start meeting other leaders like Chris Wilson, people like Holly Shook, who in her neighborhood in West Baltimore decides to start a Main Street business, a coffee shop, which becomes a chain of coffee shops that's hiring young people from the neighborhood and from the community. And just like Chris, Holly took it upon herself to find solutions to some of the most challenging and pressing issues. And so in my quest to be useful, I start talking to the Chris's and Hollies of the world, saying, well, what's it going to take to help scale your construction business or scale this coffee shop and take that to the next level? And I'd assume that the answer was money. I assume that people say, well, I need more money or I need more financing. And that wasn't it at all. Invariably, people say, well, I don't really have the talent. I don't have people here in the trenches working with me, helping us take this work to the next level. And what I need are the teams of people who are as dedicated to this as I am. And so whether it was Chris Wilson or Holly Shook or Joe Jones from the Center of Urban Families, I encourage you to look into his work, Sarah Heminger at Thread, Dr. Lena Wynn, who was the commissioner at our health department, who now runs Planned Parenthood for all the world. It turned out that Baltimore was incredibly saturated with massively talented, charismatic, visionary leaders who were devising some really innovative and creative solutions. And that Baltimore actually, rather than being defined by its challenges, defined by its deficits, defined by, have you seen The Wire? It's like the number one question I get wherever I go. I could be in an airport in London and be like, I'm from Baltimore. They're like, have you seen The Wire? Yes, I have seen The Wire. I'm actually partial to season 5. That we actually had the solutions and the people that we needed to solve our challenges. What we didn't have was connection. That Baltimore was a incredibly provincial and siloed place that didn't know that it had the greatness in its midst to solve a lot of those challenges. And it's a good thing we had assets, because in April 2015, we were severely tested. I'm sure you're familiar with the death of a young man named Freddie Gray, 25-year-old African-American man who grew up in Sandtown, Winchester, a small neighborhood in West Baltimore. One day, the police encountered Mr. Gray on a bicycle, chased him down the street, tackled him, dragged him into a police van. A week later, Freddie Gray was dead. And the world really focused on how Freddie Gray died. And in Baltimore, we had, depending on who you ask, riots or an unrest or an uprising, where the community came together and said we had had enough. And the world, I think, unfortunately didn't focus as much on how Freddie Gray lived, that he lived in public housing, that he was subject to lead poisoning, that he had basically a functional education of a 5th grader, that he had long bouts of under and unemployment, and the list goes on and on and on. And what the world focused on instead was, well, this is Baltimore of The Wire. And they were missing the fact that Baltimore was grappling, as exhibited by Freddie Gray's life and how he lived, with issues that you see not just here in Baltimore City, but here in Portland, and Birmingham, Alabama, and Detroit, Michigan, and New York City, and urban cores in the wealthiest nation in the history of the planet. Freddie Gray was not unusual, he was very normal. And we missed all of that. And so, meanwhile, in Baltimore Core, we were early on in our work, and I distinctly remember thinking, this might be it for us, because when you really break it down, we're a recruitment organization, right? We recruit really smart, talented people to go do work in social change. And we saw the enrollment and class yields of Johns Hopkins University down by 20%, at MICA, at the University of Baltimore, at the University of Maryland, where people, young people and their parents said, you know what, I know you're supposed to go to Baltimore in the fall to start school. I think we're going to rethink that because it's on fire, and you probably shouldn't go. And we had recruited our second cohort of Baltimore Core Fellows and thought, well, we're probably going to lose all those applicants. We probably won't be able to field a class, and this might be the end of our organization, the end of our effort before we can get going. Well, we couldn't have been more wrong. This is just a smattering of Baltimore Core Fellows. We didn't lose a single applicant. And we heard from so many of them who said, I've seen what's going on with Freddie Gray. I'm seeing what's going on in the city. And rather than running away from these challenges, I actually want to run towards them. And so the first pattern that I want to highlight for you today, as exhibited by Mr. Chris Wilson and Holly and Joe Jones and Sarah Heminger and Lena Wynn and these extraordinary people, is that there are a lot of people who want to run to problems and not away from them. And there are a lot of people who have solutions to some of the most pressing challenges. And the rate limiter is not money, it's not a will to lead, it's not a commitment to solve the problem, it's connection, and it's infrastructure, and it's support, and it's creating the scaffolding that can bring people together to do the hard work of social change. It's people who come in and build a dozen playgrounds and play deserts after the Freddie Gray unrest. It's people who do architect work around the overdose crisis, saving more than 1,000 lives. Those are our folks who did all that work, really extraordinary. Or do the hard work of implementing the consent decree to reform our police, to make the city a little more just and a little more fair. And so it's on that premise that people want to run towards problems and not away from them, that they want to work together to solve big issues, that we have built our organization. Our mission is to enlist talent to accelerate social innovation and to advance a citywide agenda dedicated to equity, particularly racial equity. That last part's really important because I think a lot of times when we talk about social change work, it doesn't have the parameter of values. And so we focus a lot on what we're doing, and we're not thinking as critically how we're doing it. And that's really important when you're trying to do transformational work. How you're doing it and why you're doing it is just as important as what you're doing. And so we envision a city that's talented, that can retain its leaders and connect them, and do the hard work of solving our most challenging problems. And so today, Baltimore Core is a platform that recruits talented people into the city to take on hard assignments. We operate 5 programs. You can find them all on our website. I'm not going to bore you with them all today. But the long story short is we get people early in their career, 18 to 24-year-olds through Public Allies, people who are mid-career, 30 to 40-year-olds, and then people who are senior in your career, executives, leaders, people running entire agencies. We do quite a bit with social entrepreneurs and quite a bit with small business. We create really dynamic marketplaces where we have talented people on one side and then the people that hire them and leverage those people on the other. We do that through blind review so that people actually get a fair shake, so that talented people of color and women and other historically oppressed populations actually get connected to these roles and to these opportunities wherever they're coming from. And this is a really big deal for us because the people are coming. We get thousands of applications a year. We've seen year-over-year growth of roughly 200%. We open up an RFP, and again, people are beating down the door to come participate in this change. And for a while, that was really awesome at Baltimore Core. We loved that our platform was attracting so much interest, and that we had so many people trying to participate in these programs. And so we focused a lot on increasing the efficiency, of our work, using a lot of technology to help us process that interest. When you get 2,000 or 3,000 people coming to want to work in Baltimore, that's great. That's also a massive paper trail, right? Just think about all the applications you got to go through, right? And we're a not-for-profit organization. We don't necessarily have the resources to comb through all of that manually. And so we've used a lot of technology to do that. But here's the second pattern. We discovered something very troubling. So imagine, right? I've got my team of recruiters out in the world. They're recruiting really bright, talented, smart people. And say for our fellowship, we'll have 1,000 people apply, and then we'll have our best candidates, we'll say 100 people. And our network of employers, the city government, not-for-profit organizations, social entrepreneurs would hire from that pool, and then that would yield a core of, say, 50 fantastic fellows. Well, we found that our applicants and our finalists looked like Baltimore, which is 2/3 people of color, 1/3 white, and yet the actual fellowship, what actually got yielded, was the opposite. Right? Not ideal. Not ideal. So why was that? Well, the second pattern that is kind of a predicate of our work are the patterns that are inside of us, right? It's the pattern of implicit bias. It's the pattern that whether you are a good person or a bad person, I'd say all of us here are good people, right? Who here thinks they're a good person? I do. Right? We're all like good people. We're doing our best. We're getting through it. We like people that look like us. And we like people who remind us of us. It's why you don't see women in technology, right, predominantly. And it's why in a lot of social change work, unfortunately, you don't see proportionally African Americans and other people of color, despite the fact that those organizations are designed to serve precisely those populations. And that the people closest to the problem are closest to the solution, but too often farthest away from the resources, support, and access necessary to make those solutions real. And so we had a massive challenge of, well, it's the old proverb, you can lead a horse to water but can't make him drink. We had curated incredible pools of talented people, and yet it wasn't converting into a core that looked like the city. And so we had to think about our process and how we work. And so we started really exploring, okay, well, what does it look like for us to address and control for implicit bias in our hiring? One of the biggest tools to do that was abolishing the resume. Right? Resumes are really screwed up, guys. They're terrible. They're particularly not good. And so we started making a lot of changes, which I'll get into very shortly. I'm very pleased today that our programs now reflect the demographics of Baltimore City. Roughly 63% of people in our core identify as people of color. We have to remain constantly vigilant to make sure that we're building the pipeline, but also curating the right opportunities so that we can increase that number over time. So let's talk a little bit about resumes and what we've learned in doing that. People spend about 6 seconds reading a resume when you apply for a job. they're spending no time on this, right? And so when they do, what are they looking at? Well, they're looking at the top, right? So they're getting into like your name, and people make snap judgments about your name, your gender, your race, right? They're looking at your age when you graduated from school. Ageism's a really big thing too, right? That's another kind of myth, by the way, of our program. We believe in Bobby Kennedy's statement that youth is a state of mind, not a time of life. We don't just recruit young people, we recruit all people. So if you're young in spirit and want to kick ass and take names, come work for us. And then people kind of skip all of this, which is like, let's face it, that's like your work experience. That's like everything that you've done in your life forever. Like, we just don't read it. And then we get back to the end where the education is, because they're trying to figure out how old you are, and did you go to school like theirs, and oh my God, you went to state school, like, uh-oh, not Hopkins or not Harvard. And then they make hiring decisions around this, and then we're shocked when leadership in the social sector and leadership in the pipelines don't reflect the communities in which we're working and serving. Incredibly challenging, incredibly problematic. Now, what we recognize as a platform for the city of Baltimore, we had a responsibility to address this. In other words, we couldn't just run around and yell at people and demonize them, right? Because we really like and respect these people. We really liked our health commissioner. We really liked the people that run innovative nonprofits. So we had to make it easier for them to do the right thing. And so we spent a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of effort to really highlight what are the capabilities and what are the relevant experiences that people have, right? So if you think about right now, there is a woman who's probably 25, who's African American, who's got, we'll say, 4 siblings. Mom and dad are working 1, if not 2 jobs. And she's spending a lot of time watching those kids, and she's probably also volunteering in her church. And when she applies for a job, she's going to say, I have no relevant management experience. That is patently false. She probably has an enormous reservoir of management experience because she's got 4 very annoying younger siblings, and the church is a hot mess. Hallelujah. And so she does a lot of terrific work turning all of that around. And so what we try to mine are, what are the relevant experiences in your lives? What does that tell us about your capabilities and your ability to add value? And how can we present that in a way that very busy employers can quickly understand and process? And how do we strip out the identifiers that could lead them to make snap judgments that don't work in your favor, right? So is it really relevant for someone to know your name on your resume? Is that actually helpful? Or is that just information that we can implicitly make snap judgments that are not entirely helpful to us, right? And so we take a big inventory of these skills and capabilities, and we try to create a marketplace that matches to that, instead of marketplaces that match to proxies. So many college graduates, so many people with graduate degrees. We don't have any of those kind of educational or proxy requirements in our hiring. So about 1/4 of our folks don't have a college degree, and that is more than okay. That is fantastic, and they stand right alongside the people who have Rhodes scholarships and PhDs and MBAs, because frankly, it takes all kinds of people. And if you're going to do community work, I'd rather that you got a degree from the University of Real Life in the community doing the actual work than if you went to some place and just thought about it. Not that there's anything wrong thinking about it. I've done a lot of thinking in a lot of universities, trust me. And so this is the kind of profile that our employers get. We kind of aggregate their capabilities, aggregate kind of their experiences, we kind of standardize the presentation, and we present this information in place of the resume. And that helps us get to much better decision makers among employers. So as we think about where we go from here, we've gotten really good at doing equitable matches, right? Helping the city government hire equitably, helping the nonprofit sector hire equitably, social entrepreneurs. What does it look like to help the entire sector do this? What does it look like to really rewire human resources for an entire city so that the 21st century economy is far more equitable and inclusive? We believe that cities that compete, right, for talent need to trend to where the talent is going. And the talent is darker and the talent is female. The future is darker and the future is female. And the systems that have been erected, a lot of these human resource systems trace their roots back to the 1940s and 50s. And the past was, frankly, white and male. And there's a big disconnect there. And so as we think about the future of our work, it's really about systems change and helping rewire the way an entire city metabolizes its people and thinks about its talent base. We believe that if you do that, at the end of the day, you're going to elevate community leaders. You're going to elevate the people that are closest to the challenges and closest to the problems. And then that's going to make all the difference. And so as we look ahead, this is our third pattern. You know, our organization is called Baltimore Core. When we started doing this, we thought we were building something for Baltimore. Turns out we're not. Turns out we and many other people around this country have discovered a lot of really fundamental truths about what it means to run an equitable economy and an equitable workforce and how important that is. And whether you're in the entertainment industry or the tech industry or the nonprofit industry, there is a revolution that's happening in this country around what it means to give everyone access and everyone a fair shot. And so I expect in the months and years ahead, you'll see other cities, not just Baltimore, stepping up to the plate. And I have all the confidence in the world that Portland is going to be leading the charge. The mountain is out. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate your time.